Welcome to another episode of the How to Fight with a Longsword series, or in other words, the Lichtenauer Tradition Longsword Fencing Basic Course. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at the Krumpau, which is our third Versetzen-cut and third Meisterhau. We'll also take a look at a new guard position, the Schrankhut. Now, before we start with the actual subject of this video, please do note that the incorrect examples are exaggerated on purpose so that the issues are easier to see. All of the techniques based on the historical sources are shown according to my current interpretations. As such, they are subject to change if I ever come up with or run into a better interpretation. Just like Schilhau and Zwerchhau, the Krumpau is cut using a thumb grip. To get to the proper thumb grip, start by standing in Langort. Now, keep the point in place and the edges pointing to the directions they are already pointing to. Only move the hilt towards your dominant side. This is done by rotating your hands to the side of the grip. In the end position, you should have your hands to the side of the blade. The point should be roughly at the same level as your hands. When seen from the front, the point should be directly in front of you. Your hands should be in front of your dominant shoulder. Remember to have your wrists straight. Also remember to have your hands centered. Next movement pattern for the Krumpau. This version of the Krumpau is basically a descending cut from the non-dominant side, but it starts in a guard on the dominant side. Stand in vom Tag with your dominant foot forwards. Hold the sword in a thumb grip as explained earlier. Rotate towards your non-dominant side and bring your hands above your head. Cut a descending cut towards your dominant side. The cut should be at a rather steep angle. In the end position, the point should be slightly lower than your hands. Don't cut so that the point stays higher than your hands. Also cut at a steep angle. It is a common mistake to make the cut too wide. Then the first solo drill. Stand in vom Tag with the dominant foot forwards. Cut a Krumpau as explained earlier. Return to vom Tag and repeat. Notice that your dominant leg is forwards and you are cutting down towards it. Make sure not to cut your own leg. You can also make the cut in two parts. First rotate towards your non-dominant side and bring your hands up. Stop. Then cut. Next the same exercise but with a passing step. Stand in vom Tag with your non-dominant foot forwards. You want to first turn and bring your hands up, then step and cut simultaneously. Return to vom Tag and repeat. If you are following the lesson plan I've made, you may have noticed that there is almost no time reserved for this exercise. This is because you very much need gloves to be able to do this safely. As gloves are not a requirement for this basic course, I've decided to keep the time for this exercise to a minimum. If you don't have access to gloves, you can very carefully try out the movement pattern. Make sure not to hit the coach's hands. But if you have access to gloves, feel free to allocate more time for this exercise. Krumpau is the Versetzen which works against the ox. That being said, this is probably the most difficult of the Versetzen to actually use for this. The cut works best when it is timed to when your opponent is changing to ox from another guard. It also works if you have an opponent who tends to parry Oberhaus in an ox-like position. In that case, you can just attack with a Krumpau instead of an Oberhau and aim at your opponent's hands. However, because of the no gloves requirement, we won't be practicing that. Now to the drill itself. The trainee stands in vom Tag and the coach in ox on the non-dominant side. The fencers are at a passing step distance. The trainee cuts a Krumpau with a passing step at the coach's hands. The step should be diagonally towards the trainee's dominant side. If the coach doesn't have gloves, do not land the cut. Only very carefully practice the movement pattern. The important thing here is that the trainee properly extends their point forwards. If they think of cutting from side to side, instead of trying to cut forwards, the cut is very difficult to land. When cutting, don't have your hands too low. The trainee should have their hands roughly at the same level as the point of their sword. It is not obvious in this kind of a static drill, but if the trainee cuts with their hands low, it is extremely difficult to land the cut to the hands if the coach tries to parry. Also make sure to step diagonally. Stepping directly towards the coach's point is a very easy way to get stabbed. Then a new guard position, the shrunk hood. Once again, this is not one of the Fairläge. Stand in a good fencing stance with your non-dominant foot forwards. Hold the sword in a thumb grip so that your forearms are roughly in line with the flats. The sword should be pointing down and roughly 45 degrees behind you. The edges should be pointing up and down. The guard works just the same on the non-dominant side. You just need to have your arms crossed. You don't want to have the sword pointing directly or close to behind you. If you do, you would need to realign the sword when cutting from this guard. The edges should be in line with your cutting trajectory, that is, roughly upwards and downwards. Do not have the flats pointing up and down. Then a solo drill. Start in shrunk hood on your dominant side. Cut a krum pao by crossing your arms. In the end position, the point should point towards the ground. Return to shrunk hood on the non-dominant side by taking a passing step. Cut a krum pao from the non-dominant side. Return to shrunk hood on the dominant side by taking a passing step. Repeat. You want to have the cut angled roughly 45 degrees forwards. Don't cut straight from side to side. Also, do not extend the cut too much forwards. Then the krum pao from shrunk hood as a parry against an orbehau. The trainee stands in shrunk hood on the dominant side. The coach stands in frontag. The fencers are at a passing step distance. The coach cuts an orbehau at the trainee's head. The trainee parries the cut by cutting a krum pao at the coach's sword. The trainee also takes a small sideways step during the cut. The trainee's sword must point towards the ground in the end position. Return to the starting position and repeat. The trainee must cut so that their sword points towards the ground in the end position. Don't simply make a point-up parry. Then the same drill, but sometimes the trainee skips the krum pao to make sure that the coach is actually making proper attacks. And finally, the same drill but with free movement. Next we'll learn a parry riposte with the krum pao. First you start by cutting a krum pao as in the previous drill. Then continue the movement by bringing the point down and then back. During this, rotate towards your non-dominant side. Then continue the movement of the sword by uncrossing your arms. This brings the point up behind you and then down in a cut. You basically cross your arms to make the parry and then uncross them to cut. Do this as a solo drill. Start in shrunk hood on your dominant side. Parry an imaginary orbehau with a krum pao without a step. Then continue the movement without a stop by bringing the point back and then uncrossing your arms. Return to the starting position and repeat. When turning the parry to a cut, you want the sword to point roughly backwards. However, you don't want to bring the point or the whole sword behind you. Simply align the blade with a cutting trajectory. Then the parry riposte as a paired drill. The starting situation is the same as for the previous paired drill. The coach cuts an orbehau at the trainee's head. The trainee parries with a krum pao. Then they continue the motion of the sword by bringing the point back and then cut by uncrossing their arms. This can be done with a small sideways step or without a step. Return to the starting position and repeat. Make sure not to bring your hands up. This leaves you open for an attack. Then the same exercise, but now the trainee is standing in frontag. Make sure not to cut the krum pao too much forwards. It makes actually parrying the orbehau very difficult. Then the same drill, but sometimes the trainee doesn't parry with a krum pao. And then the same drill, but with free movement. You can also riposte with a thrust. This is especially useful if your opponent is further away. There are two ways to do this. You can make the cut as in the previous drill. As the trainee is too far, they miss the coach, but the point should stay in line as the sword and the coach's hands are in the way. You can also think of this position as the end position of a shilhau. Then thrust from there. You can also parry with krum pao and instead of bringing the point back and up to a cut, just bring it directly to the front. This can be done by parrying with the krum pao and then immediately uncrossing your hands. Then riposte with a thrust to the coach's face. Once again, don't bring your hands up as that opens you up for an attack. Before we get into the recap, go and stab that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Krumpau is one of the Vierversetzen and one of the Meisterhau. It breaks the orcs and all high trusting guards in general. It can also be used as a parry. Schrankhut is a low cutting guard which is not one of the Vierleger.